Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And welcome to the Community IT webinar celebrating the re-release of our Playbook on Cybersecurity Readiness for Nonprofits with the author, Matt Eshleman. So my name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'm the moderator today.
My name is Matt Eshleman, and I am the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT.
So moving back to this slide, the foundational, our approach, so your policies, your security awareness, the 5 kind of technical tool aspects there, and then compliance. Matt, would you like to talk a little bit about kind of for the foundational level, the types of policies and the type of security training that we would recommend?
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I think this is an area that's, I think, changed since the 2021 version. Our original version is that we're certainly kind of investing more in the policy side of things at the foundational level. So I think all organizations should have an IT acceptable use policy, again, kind of establishing those basic guidelines for the organization. I mentioned some of that earlier. How do you handle personal devices? A password policy, how are you handling mobile devices within the organization, how are you handling access to systems, right? So all of the kind of basic information that an organization should have, needs to operate really is in that IT acceptable use policy. The data privacy policy, again, is something that we typically see organizations have maybe as part of a website, or, if they have like a CRM or something, that maybe they already have that piece that just talks about how you use the organization that you are caretakers of. And so, defining that and being able to communicate that to your stakeholders is important. The new addition here of the the AI acceptable use policy for organizations that are kind of thinking about or already are, or have staff who are adopting AI tools that the organization isn't yet aware of, again, just provides an area for conversation and decision-making around, how are we as an organization going to interact with these AI tools that are just being included in all of our platforms, whether we wanted them or not. So that's a new policy that's included in this foundational tier, along with some, kind of policies that have been in place for a long time, like backups and disaster recovery. So again, even as systems have moved into the cloud, it's still an important exercise to go through and understand how is that data being protected? How can I recover it if there's some sort of corruption or deletion, either intentional or unintentional? And so just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't have to think about those things anymore. But you need to have a system in place to deal with that. And then the last two here, incident response and cyber insurance. Again, we see many organizations being intentional about purchasing cyber liability insurance because of the risk associated with a breach. And then that kind of ties into having an incident response policy as an organization. Because the organization itself needs to have a clear standard on what happens, who's going to be involved, who's our insurance provider, how are we going to interact with our MSP, right? So this is something that at Community IT, right, we have an incident response policy for when something happens to our client, but we are relying on the client to have their own policy that talks about how and when we are involved and how we interact with people and that kind of thing. So even if you have an outside partner that works with you on IT things, it's important for the organization itself to define those policy responses for themselves.
Yeah, you don't want to be realizing as something is unfolding that you don't have somebody's phone number that you need to call. So kind of running through that scenario and just figuring out who's on your call list even is important to have ahead of time.
Yep, and having that printed out, in somebody's desk, right? So the the incident response is not located on the same system that just got encrypted or deleted. So, yeah. On the security training, again, there's lots of training that organizations can kind of dip their toe in and start for free. I think we still have a free video on our website about training. There's a lot of free training resources that are out there. So just getting started is important. And then also, defining those policies and training around remote work, how, safe workspaces, how do you handle shared computing, maybe at the home, right? So just talking about defining and educating staff around good practices in these areas doesn't have to be expensive, but it does need to be intentional.
We have a question about approaches and training for mid-sized nonprofit organizations. So, especially frequency, like, would you recommend an annual all-staff training on cybersecurity is enough? Or do we recommend doing maybe smaller, shorter security trainings throughout the year? What works?
Great. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I think training is so great. And we spend a lot of time investing in our training program for our clients. And I think what we found works the best is that shorter but more frequent trainings are more effective. So I think kind of the traditional approach has been, once a year, whatever, there's a meeting or you have some online training, it takes an hour, you do it, you check it off, and you kind of go on with your life. What we like to do is quarterly trainings, that are online, that kind of have a variety of topics that are included. And so that's kind of the minimum standard would be quarterly. I like that because it keeps it shorter, more concise, and you can kind of talk about different areas, and that's kind of relevant at the time. We also like to include, alongside of the training, we like to include some test phishing. So again, you're doing some testing, you're providing some practical ways for your staff to kind of be engaged, and whatever, click on that report button so that they have a way to interact with IT that says, hey, this looks weird. Like, I'm going to report this. Is this a test phishing message? Is it real? Is it fake? And so again, that's a good way to make training, kind of a two-way or an interactive process, not just, sitting in a conference room for, an hour or two, once a year to check the box and move on.
And so then moving up through, those are our two lower levels. And then that at the foundational level, those different tools that we recommend and policies and practices, I guess, more than policies.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so these are kind of all those technical controls, and I think we, maybe kind of keep packing more and more into, what's the minimum standard that we expect organizations to have. So, as I mentioned it before, multi-factor authentication, is essential, and we are actually going through and updating our MFA guidance, and so we are now recommending what's called phish-resistant MFA, particularly for organizations that have internal IT or HR and finance contacts. And so that's to combat this attacker in the middle phenomenon where they're able to steal those authentication tokens from kind of the app-based authentication. So moving to kind of physical security keys or Windows Hello as a way to provide device-bound MFA authentication sessions. So kind of a technical term, but the idea is that we need to take some additional steps to secure our identities, and that's really at the root of a lot of this. Same thing with using a password manager. If you're just getting started, use of a password manager so that you're not reusing the same password over and over again, or creating some pattern of passwords. I literally know, I don't know, 3 passwords. I know the password to my computer, password manager, my encryption key. Like, that's it. And so this idea that we want new unique passwords for all the systems that we're using at a basic level is the approach to take forward.
I got to jump in and just say that all of this is in the Playbook. And also, we have a lot of resources on our website for many of these tools that are on this list for those 5 different areas that you'd want to make sure that you're taking steps in all of those areas. The 5 areas of identity, data, devices, perimeter, and web. And for each of those, we do have some subtitles, subheaders. So under identity, MFA and password manager. Under data, we have backups. Under devices, you'd want to have OS or third-party updates and antivirus. Under perimeter, you want to invest in spam filtering, test phishing messages, business email compromise prevention, and DMARC and DKIM. And under web, you want to make sure you're investing in a secure website platform and that you're securing your website domains. All of this advice can be found in the Cybersecurity Readiness Playbook, which is available as a free download on our site, communityit.com. But just in the interest of time, I don't know that we're going to be able to go through all of them. So I just recommend that you check them out on our website. We have podcasts about, for example, the DMARC, DKIM, which you may not know what that acronym is. Listen to the podcast. You will learn all about it. It's about email verification, that the email is coming from where it says that it's coming from. But I wanted to just be able to move on to the compliance issue as well, Matt. So at this level, at the foundational level, there aren't really tools that you can implement that will make sure you're compliant with all of the things you need to be compliant with. So can you talk a little bit about what we recommend, how you should approach it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think at the foundational level, if you haven't done so already, it's just really important to invest in leadership and kind of identify at the organization, who owns kind of IT security or who's kind of accountable for that happening. Again, you don't have to be, an IT person yourself, but our perspective is that the organization itself needs to own that responsibility. It's not something you can outsource even to a great provider, right? Like Community IT, we can do a lot, but we can't own the security decisions at your organization. And so kind of from that leadership role at the organization, then you can make the decisions around, kind of where to go and how to do planning and make some of those prioritization choices at your organization. Like that great question about how often you should do training. That's something that ideally whoever owns cybersecurity at your organization and maybe a committee or stakeholders or a leadership team would sit down and prioritize how are we going to do training and how often are we going to do it? And to do that, we recommend that you create an IT roadmap. Now, again, we have another webinar that's exclusively on creating an IT roadmap for all of your IT at your nonprofit. But you can do that for your cybersecurity strategy specifically. Once you've gone through an assessment, whether you do it yourself or you get an outsourced provider or consultant to do it for you, and you have this list of the things like where you are and the things you need to work on to get up to where you need to be safer, you can create a document out of that. And we have a little example here. So you can see that it lays out the urgency, the complexity, the impact, how many people at your organization is this going to touch? So if you're requiring everyone to use MFA, then that's going to hit everyone at your organization, and you have to be prepared for that to be a bigger project to roll that out. There may be some cybersecurity projects that only relate to a certain database that you have. And so just the people who work with that database are going to need to have that training. So it might be a lower impact. But then you would make a roadmap like this. You would add a timeline to it. You could add the people responsible for it. And I really love having a roadmap like this because it helps you report back on your progress. Sometimes working on IT and especially cybersecurity can feel like you're swimming in place.
There's always something new coming in. There's always something you got to change. Like we're just talking about the MFA, how that now has some extra things that you can do to make it more secure. So sometimes it can be hard to feel like you're making progress. So having a checklist or timeline can help your leaders and your team feel like you're accomplishing something. You can look back and say, well, we started at this level of cybersecurity, and we have, through our work and the time that we spent on it, we've gotten up to this level, this foundational level, and that can help you also respond when there are new threats to address. So we have a whole other webinar on this, the designing an IT roadmap. But I wanted to make sure that we have some time, Matt, for you to talk about, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but the types of attacks that have changed and that have helped change our recommendation, especially around financial fraud, as you were saying.
Yeah, I think that, financial fraud, and that's why, kind of coming back to those earlier slides, like that's the big word, kind of in my mind in terms of thinking about how do we protect our clients from, from these financial fraud attacks, because phishing is more dangerous, right? They're very well crafted messages that are coming, from obfuscated sources, or because of the attacker in the middle frameworks, right? Coming from actual trusted partners that you work with. And so it's not uncommon for clients, to get a malicious link that's sent from a trusted partner to a, kind of a SharePoint or OneDrive file that, that is kind of managed by the hacker and kind of is used to launch those attacks. So again, we see increasing danger and effectiveness of those phishing campaigns. The other note that we've seen here is that particularly for policy organizations, and I think that is really of a special case, those are very well crafted. We had a couple cases this past year where the attack thread seems to be targeted into, hey, like we want to have this meeting, or we're going to invite you to this conference, or we need your input into this policy document, or hey, let's come to this hotel for this meeting. Here's the agenda, and actually had people, our clients, like show up at, a restaurant or hotel expecting a meeting with, the foreign minister or his attaché, and nobody's there, and so it's just, kind of this, I don't know, James Bond, level intrigue, but these threat actors are using it all under the guise of trying to be a trusted partner and get you to open up a document.
Get you to click on something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So we did have a question earlier about the optimized and proactive levels. And I would say, we talked a little bit before, doing your risk assessment is your first step. So both the risk assessment of what you think your biggest risks, but also where you're at now, like what policies and practices do you have in place? Matt, would you talk a little bit more about this idea of optimized and then proactive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, at foundational, right, we kind of have this layer of things that we just know we need to do regardless. And then I think as you move up, or you have those baseline controls in place, then the questions, become around, to kind of what other areas may need protected, or maybe we need to extend protections or provide a more sophisticated solution in place because of the risk that, that we face. And so, those different control areas, then you start getting into more formal compliance standards. And a lot of the solutions that we talk about in the guide really do map to some of those formal compliance standards. And so figuring out, which ones to invest in, how to go about doing that, is really the work in those kind of more optimized and proactive perspectives, so that you can get to a place, probably in the proactive area where you're kind of meeting those formal compliance standards. You have a good place to document and to demonstrate and to provide feedback to executive leadership, and kind of the whole thing works to report and secure itself when you get to that more sophisticated tier.
And they might also be if you've suffered a hack, because then some of your information is out there. We do know that people are more likely to be attacked again if they've already been attacked before. So that might also inform how much you're going to put into your cybersecurity. But I wanted to let you have a chance to talk a little bit about our cybersecurity offerings, and I'm going to put the link in the chat now. It's communityit.com/cybersecurity, and that's also where people would talk to you, Matt, and schedule an assessment.
I love, talking to folks about this topic, and identifying, I think, areas to start. Because we're practitioners at Community IT, the assessment piece is really interesting because it allows us to kind of get to, providing meaningful protections to organizations. And so those different resources that we have are really, aligned around, okay, let's identify kind of what we have, but let's now be able to act on that. So we don't just have a pretty report, but we have a list of steps that we can take that are providing, improvements, right? I think at the back of my mind, right, I'm always like, well, how can I reduce the calls to our help desk about security incidents? Like I respond to them. It's not that much fun. And so if I can not have to respond to them because we can get some of these proactive solutions in place, then I think that's a benefit to everyone.
And here is the exact link that you would use to schedule some time with Matt. And if you have some questions, we do have just a few minutes for questions here at the end while we have Matt with us. So please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. But I am going to go ahead and ask one of the questions that we got at registration, which I just thought was so interesting. So this was how to transition from one vendor to another without causing disruption or bad feelings. And I don't know that that's a huge cybersecurity risk in itself, but definitely when you cause bad feelings with a vendor, with staff, that gives something extra that you have to think about. So do you have advice on changing vendors?
Yeah, we do it all the time. I think we exemplify what we would like to have in the partners that we're transitioning with. And I think, having clear documentation, identifying the systems that are in place, the tools that are in place, the accounts. I think that's one of the things that we often find is that when we inherit a client from somebody else, there will be, leftover admin accounts or other things embedded in the systems that weren't necessarily disclosed. And so that is a security issue, right? And working with an MSP, right, that you're providing a lot of access to those partners. And so whenever you transition, it's important to make sure that you really go through a thorough clean out process to make sure that anything that a previous provider had access to is kind of taken care of. Again, making sure that the new provider is using new, strong, unique passwords for all those systems. So open communication, I think, is really important, and good documentation. It's always the answer.
Yeah, that would be my advice too. I know sometimes it might be tempting to just say we're changing providers and it's going to happen next week, but I don't think that's a great option in this case. Like you really want to have some time for that handoff to happen. So there's a great question in the Q&A, which is, are there stronger or weaker cloud-based accounting systems? So like QuickBooks, Bill.com, Expensify, or donor systems as well. So those databases and tools where you're tracking your donors and your accounting, are there any specific ones that are stronger, or are there cybersecurity practices that you would in place no matter what tool you're using?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in accounting packages. I'll just start off saying that. I do think there are several kind of standards or certifications that you can look for. So again, kind of a SOC 2 compliance audit is a good one to look at, and you can get copies of that from kind of these big commercial and reputable vendors. But I also would say that no platform itself is kind of just inherently secure or more secure. You could use a very secure platform, right? Like Microsoft 365, very insecurely. And so, as long as you're not, picking, some kind of like a fly by night, kind of very under-resourced provider that's just kind of like cobbling things together. Again, I think at this point, kind of good commercial solutions can generally be trusted, but it's important to also have good security controls in place so that, again, you don't want to make everybody an admin in the system. You want to, make sure that people can only see what they need to do for their job. You want to make sure people aren't putting social security information, social security numbers in unencrypted systems and, that kind of thing. So again, any system can be used insecurely, and it's important to have a deliberate approach to implementing those tools.
That makes sense. We have another question about backups. So if you have moved into the cloud storage, do you need a local backup, like a local on-premises backup system, or what do you recommend in that case?
So for cloud file sharing solutions like Box or Dropbox or Google Drive or even SharePoint, we find that there are cloud to cloud backup solutions that are good to have in place, and you don't need to have that on-prem. So I will say, it's expensive, and I would say this is one thing where the big cloud providers are typically providing some nonprofit discounts for their service because they can subsidize it, whereas maybe the backup service providers don't do that same level of discounting. But I do think it's important to have data in a separate and disconnected system in the event that that primary data is compromised or corrupted or something. And so making sure you have data somewhere else is still a good approach, right? We talked about at the beginning, right? Just because your data is not in the server down the hall doesn't mean you don't really need to think about backups anymore. It may make it easier. There might be more versioning and there's other stuff, but if you didn't have access to that folder in Box, go through like, what is the process? Can you get back a file from a month ago or 3 months ago or a year ago if you need to be able to do that? And if you're not able to do that within the native platform, then look for a backup solution that will allow you to meet those organizational requirements.
Great. Thank you so much. So I just want to go back over our learning objectives. So we hope that today you learned the basic approach to cybersecurity that we have, the foundational level we recommend. Once you read the playbook, it will become clearer, I think. And we didn't have a chance to get really into the optimized and proactive options, but those are in the playbook. And I hope that you were able to take away some first steps and best practices in managing cybersecurity at your nonprofit. So the big takeaway I hope that you get is that you need to start.
Mm-hmm.
You need to pay attention to it. It can seem really overwhelming and really make you anxious, right? Because people are out there trying to get you to click on something. But really, you can start. You can start it yourself. Download the playbook. That's a really good start. And then just get in touch with us if you have more questions about that sort of thing. I want to make sure to tell you next month we're doing something really different, which is talking about de-stressing and self-care in nonprofit IT roles. So there's a lot of research out there on how important it is to us to stay healthy mentally and physically, and how de-stressing is a big part of that. And I think I can speak for many of us when I say having a nonprofit IT role can be extremely stressful. You have a lot of demands. You have a lot of, budget constraints. You have demands from both sides, right? Both from your leadership and from the staff that are trying to use the tools, cybersecurity, anxieties. So we're going to talk about things that you can do specifically while you're in this role to help yourself stay healthy so that you can be doing this role and helping your nonprofit achieve your mission. So I hope you can join us for that. It's November 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And you can sign up, register for it right on our site, communityit.com. And I just want to thank you, Matt, for your time today. Thank you, everyone who joined us for this webinar. Your time is a gift. Thank you for giving it to us for this hour. I hope this was helpful to you. And Matt, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and helping us get smarter about cybersecurity.
Great. Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.